Hello, everybody. I am going to talk about a subject I am extremely passionate about. So passionate about that I may or may not have written a satirical science fiction novel about this very subject under a fake name. But we'll never know if I was actually the one who wrote that, though this novel is linked in the video description below. It's Amazon page, so definitely check it out. But I wanted to talk about the fundamental misconception and problem with America's race debate, because I think a lot of people who debate the issue of race in America contemporarily, or even arguably since 1964 or even before that, have missed the key fundamental issue in all our discussions about race in America and all the problems and controversies this causes, whether people, are trying to argue for more like policies involving racial preferences and such, or less policies involving racial preferences, or whether they're trying to talk about disparities in policing or disparities here, or any other issue intersecting race in America. And there's really, people just don't understand what this debate is actually about. There's all these different sides arguing all these different things, and they just don't understand what the other sides are saying and really what's going on here. And I'm going to tell you right now what's actually going on in the American race debate, because it's fairly simple. We have a bunch of different groups in this country who are all tribalists, who all believe that some groups should arbitrarily discriminate against other groups and that some groups are better than other groups. However, they all disagree on how the lines should be drawn to define these groups. You have some groups, your kind of traditional Jim Crow racists, who believe that race in a biological or genetic sense, race as in like, I literally have this ancestry, if you look at my grandparents, great-grandparents, etc., going back to a certain continent. Those folks believe that the most important distinction between people is their physical, biological race, the genetics, a materialistic characteristic. That's what they believe. And for someone who believes that culture is the most important thing that divides us, they're horrified. They're like, no, I don't care what your genetics are. I don't care about your physiology. I don't care about your ancestral genetic line, your mitochondria going back to Europe or Africa or Asia or whatever. I don't care about your, what your literal skin color is. I just care about that you have similar cultural values to me. And as long as you have the same cultural values I do, we're on the same side. I like you. And if you don't have these values, then screw you. So, when you have people then, and so these people who think that their culture is the best and that other cultures are bad, they get really offended when they get lumped in with the people who divide by, race in a genetic physical sense. They freak out. They're like, no, I am not someone who discriminates based on race. Because when they hear race, they think genetics, they think physiology. I don't care about your genetics or physiology. I care about culture. And I'll never, because you have insulted me and lumped me in with those people who distinguish based on genetic race, I hate you. So there's that. So right then and there you have a problem. And then you have another group that doesn't even care about races in a genetic sense. And they don't even care about culture. They don't even care what culture you have either. They just care about socioeconomics. They just care about whether you're, poor or rich or middle class or whatever. They're like, look, they say, I don't care what race you are. I don't even care what culture you have. I just care that we are both educated and professionals, or that we're both working class, and screw everyone else. And if you lump me in with those people who believe that you should discriminate based on, genetics or discriminate based on culture, well, screw you. I hate you. I'm not like those people. I discriminate based on socioeconomics. That's the way I draw distinctions between people. How dare you imply that I draw distinctions in a different way? So you have this huge argument going on between people who think the distinctions that divide us are, physical ancestry genetics, people who think the distinctions that divide us are culture, and people who think the distinctions that divide us are class and socioeconomics. And they all think that their way of dividing humanity and tribalizing is the best way to do it, and they become extremely insulted if you try to imply that they tribalize and divide humanity in another way. So that's where you get this huge debate going on, as Ibram X. Kendi called it, between assimilationists, segregationists, and anti-racists. where you have all these different sides and they want to divide humanity in different ways and they just can't talk to each other because they're like, "Rah, rah, 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 how dare you, how dare you, how dare you." Yeah. And that's the problem. And the problem is, like we don't we want to divide ourselves and tribalize and separate ourselves from our fellow human being and create distinctions in fundamentally different manners, and we think that our way of discriminating against people and dividing people apart is the morally just, or at least least bad way to do it, and that other ways of dividing people are evil. And then on top of this, there is another meta distinction going on, which is the divisions themselves between those who discriminate based on class, those who discriminate based on genetics, and those who discriminate based on culture are meta-political distinctions themselves, where someone's like, well, even if I discriminate based on race in a cultural sense, I want to hang out with other people who discriminate based on race in a cultural sense, even if we're of different cultures. And then other people who discriminate based on race in the genetic sense are like, well, our allies are other people who discriminate against race in the genetic sense, which is why actually you had the Nation of Islam and the American Neo-Nazi Party had some friendship going on, or had some shared events or guest speaker stuff in the 60s, interestingly enough. And people who discriminate based on socioeconomics, I'm sure same thing, like, probably the rich people who want to discriminate based on, only hang out with rich people, and the poor people who only want to hang out with poor people might very well get along better. So this is the problem, that the issue is the tribalizing and the distinguishing between people to begin with. Because even if we eliminate racism, we're just going to have other ways of dividing each other. And people are just going to be as miserable anyway. It just, maybe some ways are less bad. You could argue maybe class is a more mutable characteristic than race. Like, at least you could change it. But fundamentally, you get rid of racism, you're just going to have something else dividing people. And that's the problem with this debate. Like, the people who think that, dividing by race or culture is abhorrent, they end up wanting to divide by class or divide by politics. It's just all, really the only answer is everyone comes together as one humanity for Christ, regardless of any distinctions. And that's the only way it's ever going to be solved. Otherwise, they're going to, eventually maybe they'll get rid of racial classifications, we'll have some other way to divide us apart, and it'll be just as bad in a different way. And that's how it'll go. That's the only way it's going to happen. Yep. Everyone come to Christ, believe in God, believe there's no distinction between any human being, regardless. And that is how you will solve the American race problem.